Hi, hello, bonjour, and namaste. This is Out of the Clouds, a podcast at the crossroads between business and mindfulness, and I'm your host, Anne V. Muller-Thaler. Today, my guest is Heidi Lender. Heidi is someone that I have heard about for so many years without actually knowing her name. And we will tell you that story. But one day, an amazing synchronous event brought us together. And this is why I had the chance to get to know her and, of course, invite her on the podcast so I could ask her as many questions as I can about her amazing life journey. In our conversation, Heidi tells me about her upbringing, how she landed in fashion and moved from New York to Paris to report for W and WWD magazine, where she became fashion director at the age of 26 years old. We talk about her impulsive streaks and how she left the fashion world, got to Aspen, then got into yoga and studying with Pattabhi Jois. But we also talk divorce, falling out of love, IVF, dark moments, and what it's like when we feel our inner light is dimming. She also explains how she magically came across her dream house and found herself anew thanks to the misty local landscapes that surround her, as well as the medium of photography. She tells us about the practice of self-portrait and how she trained herself to become a fine art photographer. We move then the conversation to discussing Campo Garzon, the non-profit creative institute and festival that supports international artists, which she founded and now runs. It's an amazing creative pursuit through which she aims to offer transformative experiences for the artists in residence and new perspectives for those in attendance. Without further ado, let me leave it at this. Here's my interview with the wonderful Heidi Lender. Happy listening. Heidi, it's so lovely to see you this time. Welcome to Out of the Clouds.
It's so great to be here. Love seeing you. Thanks for having me.
Now, I like to start the podcast by asking my guests to tell us their story. And I know that's a big, wide, open, expanse of a question. But I like that we get to recreate ourselves every time we choose to tell our story in a different way. Would you tell me your story and how you came to be the person you are today as well?
Yeah, sure. I'll try to make it succinct. So I was born in New Haven, Connecticut. My father is also from Connecticut, but his family is from Poland, had a family business. And so they're very New Haven people, and I had a lovely childhood there. And I left when I was 18. I went to university. I studied apparel and textile management and went on to work in magazines, actually, which I don't know if this happened to you, but when we were growing up, it wasn't like today. I don't know if I was sheltered, but it wasn't like, oh, you could do this or this. There was not a lot of possibilities in front of us. And I had no idea. And even at 18, I was like, what am I going to study? I like to do a lot of things. But then there was this fashion major. And I was like, okay, but it was almost by default. I could have been in psychology. I thought I might be a psychologist for a second. And then that passed. Anyway, so I studied apparel and textiles and not knowing anything. I loved magazines since I was very young. I had a subscription to 17 magazine. Actually, this reminds me talking about it that I wrote into a writing contest. I must have been like 16 to 17 magazine. I have no idea what I wrote. But anyway, I loved magazines. I really did. And so I ended up from a friend of the family. I got an internship at Elle magazine right when I graduated. And so that started my career in fashion publishing. And I went on to work for W magazine and Women's Wear Daily in Paris, and then in New York, and then back in Paris, where we probably met. We don't know. Did we?
We certainly did, but I don't remember. But I'm sure we did. We must have.
I'm sure we did, because it does definitely, just seeing you now, it's like we definitely knew each other. definitely in some life. And anyway, I was in my 20s. And in the end, I was associate bureau chief of the Paris office and the fashion director in Paris. And it was a very big job for a 26-year-old
Sure.
workaholic, but a wonderful experience that, you know, I wouldn't have traded that for the world. But anyway, I worked in publishing and then I left Paris and I moved to Aspen on a whim. In my story now, you'll understand that I am a whim type person. So I moved to Aspen on a whim. I met my ex-husband on a whim who sold me ski boots my first week in Aspen. I worked for Aspen Magazine. I continued to freelance. And then after we went on a big trip around the world, backpacking. I think I turned 30 in the Himalayas, a big adventure after knowing a guy for 6 months. And after that, we landed in the Bay Area and I freelanced for a while. So I wrote for fashion magazines and shelter and travel. And I worked for LA Magazine and San Francisco Magazine. Anyway, that was a chapter. My ex and I had decided we would live in San Francisco for 3 years. He wanted to be a stockbroker, and I was going to be the supportive girlfriend / wife. And I said, okay, we'll do this for 2 or 3 years, and then we're going to do what I want to do, even though I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. But I had this inkling that I wanted to be an artist and have a farm in Montana. It was something I thought, I don't really want to live in the city or be there. And 5 years passed. And on the 5th year, something started knocking on my soul, let's say, that you're definitely going down the wrong path here. So it was hard. It was a hard time. And there was some other things that happened that were like, something's not right here. Something's not right with my relationship. Something is not right with me. And it felt a flame had gone out inside of me. When I look back now, it feels like my creativity was not squelched by him, but that I put it out to put the relationship first. Some big learnings you can see in hindsight.
Yeah. You put the light out to put the relationship first.
Yeah, I think it's like a dimming, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And by the way, it's not the first time and it was not the last time. So it's big lessons for me in that department. But I did get it and moved on. And then I ended up going to India to study yoga. I continued to freelance. And then one day I was writing a story for Travel and Leisure on shopping in Bangalore and then shopping in Goa. And here I was going deep inside and learning about non-attachment and no competition and nonviolence. Not that writing about shopping is violent, but there was a big disparity. It was a huge contradiction what I was doing. And I actually stopped writing for magazines at that moment. And I dove deeper into my yoga practice and just had a whole chapter of internal wonder and seeking and that cliche seeking thing, which was great.
Tell me just a bit more about what stopped you writing.
It was the paradox that I was like, here I am looking at who am I? And one part of me is looking at the superficiality of the fashion world, which is why I left W to begin with. I couldn't quite connect anymore in the fashion world itself. So in Paris, it's full on, especially working for women's wear in W. And so I remember I was specifically sitting in a cafe. I had gone back to New York for a few months and I was writing a story. I think it was about shopping in Goa. I was writing with a friend of mine and I said, "What, can you read this?" And I was like, what the F am I doing? So like what I was writing was so ridiculously superficial that it didn't align with where I was in my seeking of self. And so I dropped it. I also dropped it like I would like this notion of I'm going to sell all my clothes or I'm going to get rid of all my clothes from the fashion world. It was like that idea, which I thought I might do, but of course I didn't do that because in the bottom of my heart and soul, which I know now, is I'm both. I love this, not in its superficiality, but I love the art of fashion. I love the beauty of it. I love the making of it, the creativity of it, the expression of wearing it. But that took me a while to come to grips with that answer that I am both. I am everything.
Sure.
Did you have that experience at all?
I think I'm going through it now. It's been coming on for a while, but it's true that there's room for me to still love it. But I'm confused as to what is my role in this industry at this point.
Yeah. It's interesting. The mirror, or what it reflects back, is there's a person on the other end making, right? Creating. And that, we talked about this before too, that was one of the things that I really loved. What I loved about my job at Women's Wear especially was finding new designers and supporting them. And that's what I do now, which we'll talk about later, is to support artists that want to get their stuff out there into the world and share.
Yeah, it's an interesting red thread, actually, through your career. We'll get to that.
Yeah. Whenever I had a breakup or whenever I was sad about something, I would get on a plane or get in my car or go on a road trip. It's like movement is really helpful for me. And also being in new environments, and whether I'm quote unquote running away, or I like to think of it as running towards myself, is probably a combination of both.
But it's also, you're present. You're no longer just in your head, right? You're out in the world. You're being in the world.
Being in the world and having a bigger perspective, right? Seeing other humans that have it way worse than I do, or way better, or whatever it is, just seeing other human beings and relating to people and cultures and things like that.
And so that's how you found your way to Garzon, I think.
It is. So
tell us the story about how you found your house.
So we decided to not go back to India. And I said, let's go to South America. Neither one of us had been here. But okay, let's travel. We're going to travel for 2 months on a budget. We're going to plan out the trip. And we're going to go see some yoga people in Brazil. But we'll start in Argentina. And when I looked at the map, neither of us had been to South America. I traveled a lot, but not down here. And I saw on the map that in between Argentina and Brazil is little Uruguay, my lonely planet. It said take the ferry from Buenos Aires to Uruguay, to this little heritage town. You could take the ferry, and we did that. And then we got on a bus and we came up the coast, and I planned the trip out. So I had hotels where we were staying. It was very cheap to travel in Argentina at the time. And Uruguay, for some reason that I didn't understand at the time, was ridiculously expensive, like the opposite of Argentina. And that's because I know now the place where we were going on the beach, where we were going to travel up the coast to Brazil, was the resort area of South America. So all Argentines, all Brazilians are all flying and staying in their beautiful houses on the beach. Moneyed people that come here on vacation for years and years. It's a big family destination. It's like the Hamptons of South America, or like the Côte d'Azur of South America. And I didn't really understand that. We get on the bus and it's New Year's and Christmas. It's like the highest season week in this area and in the Punta del Este area. And of course, there's no hotels available. We did find this place at the beach, and I was struck immediately by the vibe, like how I felt like I discovered this cool place that I hadn't read about, that W hadn't written about. Maybe once, like Punta del Este sounded familiar, but I really didn't know anything about it. So it felt, okay, we're in a cool place. But anyway, I couldn't find a place for New Year's. And I Googled, I find Francis Malman's, the chef's little 5-bedroom place, and he happens to have a place free, not for free, but we get there. We come here to this little village on a ridiculously expensive taxi from Punta, where I remember saying to people, we're going to Garzon, and everyone at the hotel, everyone was like, why are you going there? No one could understand why we would go to the middle of nowhere, because that's how it feels. People are like, there's nothing there, da, da, da. And I was like, there's a hotel there.
They've got a room for me.
They've got a room. So we're going there. Anyway, the taxi got lost. It took 2 hours to get here. I thought we were getting kidnapped. I didn't speak a word of Spanish. It was ridiculous. I really did think we were getting kidnapped because I didn't know anything about South America, that Uruguay is the Switzerland of South America and it's safe. I was very ignorant, very, very ignorant. I was like super gringa ignorante, like super ignorant. Anyway, we finally pull in and we go to the old general store, which is Francis's place, and walk through the doors. And I'm like bewitched, like instantly. I'm like, where am I? This is gorgeous. It's not fancy. It's really well appointed. It was like rolling into a ghost town and then going through the doors of some beautiful, magical, well-styled, cool place. It felt like a secret. I felt like I was in the coolest secret ever on the planet. And anyway, we had an amazing 3 days and a New Year's up with Francis was there. And we met some friends of his that lived in the village at a big barbecue for New Year's. And on the third day, I should say that I was starting to take pictures. So I had my first camera with me that I didn't really know how to use because it was the digital. So this was like my South America trip that I was getting out of my depression was a little bit also about creativity. I'd stopped writing, but now I was very interested in taking pictures, which became much easier to me. And it was same kind of storytelling, although I wasn't covering fashion, but I could have been covering travel or whatever. But I was just so fascinated with taking pictures at this point. So one morning, I think the second morning we were here, I got up at sunrise and I took a walk around the empty village and I turned a corner and there was a lot of for sale signs around the village. But I turned this corner and I saw this little yellow house with 5 for sale signs on it. But when I turned the corner, I had this moment in my whole body that I actually gasped. I was like, I had this holy shit moment. That's our house. That is my house. And I ran back to the hotel and I woke up John and I was like, I found our house. And so John and I came back and we looked at this little yellow house and we had somebody introduce us to the owners. It was like on the edge of town with 80 acres in the back, which I knew he would love because he's a farming guy. And that's it. And then we met the owners and we put a bid in that afternoon. Then they changed the price. We said, okay, well, we'll think about it. We went on to Brazil. After a week in Brazil, we're like, what are we doing here? We got to go back and get the house. And we came back to Garzon and we bought the house.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's another whim happened.
Whim or just intuition? I don't know.
It was very intuitive. It was a very magical moment that then had all its complications because John and I broke up a year later. Mm-hmm. And then I was faced with another who am I? Now who am I without my partner? And here we are.
And here you are.
I was dealing with the who am I and a very sad moment in my life. Again, different kind of depressed, but more the space of everything was wrapped up in my partnership, my relationship. The buildings we owned, the business we had, our future here in Uruguay. And at the same time, I was almost, maybe some flame again. That dimming had happened and a flame was being ignited at the same time. And so, I feel very grateful that I had this tool, a camera, to get myself out of bed in the morning, which I did. So I'm very, very most photographers are, but very inspired and fueled by light. And at the time I was really obsessed with fog, which is a really beautiful foggy atmosphere.
You still are, but you also are in a place where the fog is crazy beautiful.
Yeah, it's really beautiful.
Because it's not like that everywhere in the world. Let's be honest.
No, I think there's some crazy energetic vortex in Garzon, and but superficially, the light is ridiculous. I feel like during that time, the only thing that would really get me out of bed or get me going or took me on a few cross-country trips was taking pictures. And if I were bold, which I am, I would say that photography in a way saved my life. Not that I was like nearing the end, but I was definitely having a very bad time. And so at the same time that I was very sad, I also was getting out of bed and making a lot of work. I had a little Bichon Shih Tzu. He just passed away a year ago.
I'm just
Baba.
looking at him.
Yeah, little Baba. So Baba was my sidekick. And I think for 4 years, those 4 years after the breakup, we maybe took a self-portrait with my iPhone almost every morning. So it was like a practice. I was still practicing yoga too, but I did both in the mornings. So we did a lot of self-portraits, but there was no one around. I shot with my iPhone, which I probably started with an iPhone 4, 5, 6, 7. It was very early days. And my photography career took off. I found a community online. I started at Flickr. That's how I learned how to take pictures, was on Flickr. Remember Flickr?
I remember vaguely. I didn't really use it very much, but yeah.
I was obsessed. And I met people there and I joined groups and I studied a lot. I came from magazines, so that's one kind of photography. But there was this whole world of fine art photography out there. And then the digital world was very accessible. And so I just like dove in. So imagine I'm like very thin, very sad, eating very badly, taking very bad care of myself physically, and mourning and grieving and trying to get back together in this relationship. And also my photography career is taking off. So like I had my first solo show. I was very active and juried, submitting.
Amazing.
I just made a lot of work quickly. And again, magic, it feels like to me that it took off. And so I continued taking pictures. Some of that happened when John and I were still together. Some of the series were at the end. And then I kept shooting. I just kept shooting.
It does feel bold to do self-portraits. And I recognize, tell me where I'm wrong, your desire to find yourself in seeing yourself on picture. And you do talk about this being a practice, but what did it bring you? And do you still practice self-portrait?
Yeah, it's a really good question that I actually feel like is an evolving answer, because I have to ask myself this all the time, and I'm writing a lot now again, and I'm also asking myself what the answer to this is, because I think it's very layered. But immediately, like I remember when I very first finally started to understand how to use the actual camera, a friend of mine said, "Oh, you should just take portraits." And I had no confidence in how to take pictures in light and anything. And I remember going down into the yoga studio. We lived upstairs in San Francisco. I took some stuff downstairs and I put the thing on the show. I was going to take pictures of ceramic cups, like whatever, a still life practice. And at one point I turned, it's so beautiful. The yoga studio is so beautiful. It looked like a photo studio. Actually, it had like very faint lavender walls that were almost white and this not polished concrete floor. It was amazing. And so I remember just turning the camera on myself. Like I slumped down in the corner and put my head down and I took a picture, and then I did like, you have to run back and forth and put the self timer on because there was no clickers. I didn't even know anything.
Sure.
And I took a couple shots of looking at the camera. And I remember looking at the camera and I was like, who is that person? It was a moment where I was like, I didn't even recognize myself, which is different than looking in the mirror. It was like somehow it's just so weird. I've never even said this out loud, but it was like watching a movie of my life, of another person who was me. Right. So there was a very distant perspective that I suddenly saw in myself, that I was like, oh, I am not ugly, or I am not bad, or I am not all these belief systems that I feel terrible about myself or unlovable or whatever. I saw something, I dare to say beautiful, because it wasn't like, oh, she's beautiful. It had nothing to do with the superficial beautiful, but it was almost like, oh, I saw my spirit. I don't even know how to say it without sounding super woo woo, because it wasn't nothing egotistical about it. Sure. Nothing. But it was like a light bulb went inside of Heidi, the Heidi watching the Heidi. Does that even make sense?
It does. I'm not making this up, right? That when the first cameras were introduced to indigenous people in I think it was in the United States, that they were against getting their picture taken because they thought that it could capture their soul, because of the magic of the reveal of the finished product, the picture. And so what you described sounds like there's an echo of what would have been the first models who were just incredulous about what this tool actually can do.
I need to read about that. That's amazing.
Did you not hear about it? I have reread about it. I don't remember why. I once went back down the Google rabbit hole to find out about that. Yeah, people thought there was a mythical power in the machine and that it was going to steal their soul. And suddenly you saw your soul. Anyways.
Yeah. Or I saw something.
I saw something. The flame?
A flicker. Yeah. I do think that it was something like that. I do think so. And so, yeah, I mean, if someone else takes my picture, it's a terrible situation. Yeah. I can't stand it.
I hear you, girl. I hold you in my heart because it's the same for me. Oof. Yeah.
So I really don't like it to other people take my picture. And yeah. So there was something about this practice that has helped me to define who I am. So you are correct.
Fabulous.
It's just strengthened me in some way. It empowered me. Now, keep in mind, I was and still somewhere am a very insecure person, like very, and very wounded in a lot of like child ways that one is wounded maybe by a narcissistic parent, let's say. Now I'm in a moment where I took pictures for a long time where you didn't see my head. And I just read a book recently called The Beheaded Goddess, which is about daughters of narcissistic fathers. Which is also very interesting to feel like maybe through photography was a way of growing my head symbolically. And actually, eventually I've shown my face in images, or felt okay enough to show my face. So in a way, self-portraiture has been a process of me finding my head, really, or growing my head.
That's amazing. How did you go from this practice and your development as an artist to creating Campo Garzon? And can you explain to our listeners what it is?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Campo is a nonprofit I founded when I was turning 50. So 8 years ago. I had finally gotten happy. My photography career was in a good place. As one does when they're maybe in the 50 area, start reflecting about second half of life or this mid-age. It's a big age. I woke up one day and I was like, wait, I've got 80 acres, 33 hectares here. I have animals on my land that are somebody else's, but they're not mine. There's a winery opening up down the street with a guy that wants to make a new wine region here. Like I felt things were bubbling and that it was it was a moment where I was like, okay, maybe this is my time to use my land and my experience to do something large and help and be of service in a different way than I feel like I have been on one-on-ones or with yoga.
Sure.
And I wasn't sure what that was, but I knew that something was bubbling. And then one day I got the download somehow. I wish there was a magic story, but I had gotten so much. I was so enriched by my life here and by the opportunity of having so much space and time. And even though they were sad years, the fact that I was in magic land here with very little noise in nature, beautiful skies and light, I decided that was something that I wanted to give to other creative people and to give value to them, as I felt like I finally had given to myself. It's been a place where I became an artist, where I really was like, you know what, Heidi, you're not a imposter syndrome writer, which I felt for forever. Mm-hmm. And you are actually a creative person. You're not a business person. Now I am a business person because I run a nonprofit, but it all comes together. We're everything. But it was the first time when I applied to a residency program around the same time. I was chosen from an application. Somebody said, she's an artist. She can come. It was like a big moment for me to be valued as a creative person. And so that is the gift of Campo, that we bring other artists from around the world, chefs, writers, creative people in general, to do residencies and be here in this corner of beauty, to have time and space to do whatever they need to do.
That sounds so cool. I was writing a couple of notes because I picked up on your vocabulary during this conversation. And one thing strikes me. First, I love metaphors, and so do you. I can tell. But you talked about the prince's castle. You talked about John's kingdom and the magic land of Campo. It does sound like you're in some kind of fairy tale to me. Now, I'd love to understand, how can people participate? What kind of programs do you run? Is it all year? Just give me the download, because it sounds wildly wonderful. And of course, I'm going to find a way to come and visit you.
You must,
obviously.
Please. Definitely must come. Right now, our residencies are on hold as we're about to do our 8th. We have an annual art festival.
Yes, that's what I wanted to hear about. Exactly.
Yeah, the festival. So when we started Campo, I say we because now we're a bunch of amazing women. And I started with one woman, Gabby. She volunteered to start with me, but so I call us we. I knew as an outsider here in our little tiny village that to do something big, especially bringing art to a place that was pretty culturally barren, the landscape, that I really wanted to be a part of this community that I love and not create something that is us and them or the American, she's doing this and that. And it was really important that if we were going to bring artists from the outside, even if they were from Montevideo or from wherever, that we really integrate with the Pueblo. So I said, okay, let's do a festival, something public. So we will bring artists from the outside. It's important that we integrate with the village and introduce art to everybody, and that art is accessible to everyone. So we started this festival at the same time that I started the residency. I mean, I had no idea what I was doing, but I mean, literally.
Isn't it better?
I mean, it happened. It's a creative institute. So I was like, we have a fake business plan. And honestly, it was all backwards, but it was great. So we brought all these artists. We had like 45, I think, artists participating with their pure like love and energy. We didn't have any money. And we took over the little pueblo there's an abandoned train station, which just got reformed. There's little houses that are abandoned around, and we just took over, and the artists intervened and made site specific work. And like thousands of people showed up. thousands of people from Uruguay. And it was crazy. It was only 4 hours. So it felt like this insane invasion of humans descending on the Pueblo. It was really fun. But I knew from the first one that was only 4 hours that we were onto something and that there was some need for art and connection and creativity and community. And so it has grown. It's a 3-day festival. Now we have our 8th edition in December. It's every December 28th, 29th, and 30th. It's during the high season, that week that I was here. Of course. And we changed everything up a little bit this year to connect with our mission a little bit more, which is to bring artists to have a transformative experience. That's really what I want. So instead of having just artists come in for a day and make work, we now have a residency connected to the festival. And this year we have 14 artists in residence coming, which is crazy because we've only ever had 5 or 6 at a time. So we've rented all these houses. We don't have a building yet. We've rented all these houses around, and they'll be here for a month making site-specific work around a theme. We have a theme every year, and this year it's unsettled, on migration and movement. And so we like to create conversation around the theme through art, through online conversations. We're launching a film forum virtually, which maybe some of your listeners will want to come. It's a shorts festival. So we'll have, I think it's the last Monday of every month, starting this August.
Amazing.
And it will be a short on migration. We have 4 amazing shorts, and then the directors will speak after, or we'll have a conversation. It's an hour-long Zoom or webinar, and we can put the link in because that's really cool.
Amazing.
One of our missions with Campo, as I know you will appreciate, is that you're going to have a conversation out in the middle of nowhere around a dinner table that is way different than having a conversation in a New York City or Parisian restaurant. You're in a different frame of mind. It's slower. There's no noise. There's no distractions. You're disconnected. A lot of deep shit happens around here, right? Yeah. It's a lot of self-reflection, a lot of connection, a lot of really beautiful conversations and friendships and things that have come out of this amazing program.
Forgive me, but it sounds magical.
Yeah.
Kind of. It is. The thing is, I have looked at the Campo website quite a lot when I was doing some research before our conversation, and some of the images they're very pretty. I was like, oh, I could see myself there. Good photography always helps tell a story. So I apologize for the listeners. I hope that the words carry as much for you as it does for me, but I'll try to put a couple of links so that you can go and check out the previous editions of the festival.
Thank you. Thank you.
What is your hope for the future of Campo?
So right from the start, I had a huge vision for Campo, that it would be a very significant and important institute of creativity in South America, where creativity is at the forefront through, let's say, looking at universal and planetary issues through a creative lens. And so I think residencies and being able to help individual artists is really important, because as my who am I thing, I think that's the place that we need to start, and is to look inside. And I think the festival is another level of sharing that with the public. But the bigger vision of Campo is that we're able to bring, let's say, a group residency kind of think tank of multidisciplinary groups, where you would bring an artist with a scientist and an entrepreneur and a tech person and a medical person together for a 5-day summit / retreat or group residency, and bring that conversation into the middle of nowhere around a theme, which would be our annual theme. Last year, it was about the roots of land and water, like an ancestral look at the environment. And this year, it's about migration. Next year, I can't tell you yet because I haven't unveiled it. But that being able to convene humans together to discuss issues that will then result in some creative project, whether it's a film, a magazine, music, a symposium, that would be the end of it. And then that ripples out, right? You take that home, you have a new perspective. Say you're a scientist, you've now heard from an artist, you bring new perspectives back with you to your home, to your community, to your work. That's my hope. We don't have a building yet.
Mm-hmm.
It's been designed by the late architect Raphael Vignoli, who passed away quite suddenly last March. Campo is one of his last designs, which is a really beautiful, amazing building. And so my hope is that when that is built, after we raise a lot of money for that we will be able to have year-long programming and residencies for 9 months and these creative summits then twice a year. But until then, it's hard. We have to rent, build it. It's not ideal.
Yeah. And also it's tiny and you're in the middle of nowhere.
Exactly.
Yeah. But it does sound like the vision that you have is really clearly outlined, and I'm excited to see how that's going to come together.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you this question, and then we can perhaps wrap things up. In the mission, you describe your hope as being that what comes out of the conversations is new perspectives. What does a new perspective mean to you?
So, you know how you can think you know everything?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And then you're like, okay, I've gone through all the possibilities of this, or I'm thinking about this. And then suddenly somebody else, not from your world, or that's been somewhere, or you just told me the story about the indigenous humans and cameras, like there's something else that lights the flame or ignites something, an idea you've been stewing on, or you find out that halfway around the world, somebody else is doing something similar, but they're thinking about it this way, or there's a new connection to another human being that you didn't know that someone knows, or somebody, I think opening your mind, body, soul is and allowing in different perspectives then gives you a new perspective. It's like an ingredient. It's an ingredient to growth. It's an ingredient to possibility and opportunity. And it's like creative thinking. It's creative thinking.
Thank you.
Ideating.
Yeah, of course.
Like it's the word ideating that is just like in my brain this week.
Interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that. I feel like you're planting seeds in the conversation. So I'll reflect back to you because I can tell this is going to percolate for me.
Seeds are good.
Yes, I think so too. Now, before I go to my closing questions, is there anything else that we haven't touched on that you want? Oh my God, no, I forgot to talk about Christian Louboutin.
Oh my God.
No, because I want to tell a story to our listeners about how we met, and just make sure that you tell your side of that magical story. So there I was going to TED the one in Vancouver, and I was feeling a bit poorly and tired, and I was on this big escalator and someone said, "Nice coat." And I turned around to see a lady with like really cool glasses and a very cool hat. And I said, "Thank you." And then we started walking and you told me your name. And then about 4 hours later, as we're walking out of the first evening, the first party for the TED newbies, suddenly we figured out that you were the journalist who had written the first piece on Christian Louboutin, the now very famous Red Soul King of the Universe, also known as my ex-boss. And that I had heard of you so many times because I sat with him through so many interviews when people said, oh, how did you get started? And he was like, well, this one journalist from W Magazine wrote an article and then the customers started flooding in. Now, I don't think it was floods quite, but you opened the gates for his North American clientele. And dare I say, they made his business take off. Yeah. And of course, he's got amazing fans everywhere and great clients everywhere in the UK and in Southeast Asia and Europe. But anyways, he referred to you as his fairy godmother. And I didn't know your name. So imagine my stupefaction when I realized that I'm in Canada, in a city I've never been in a crowd of 2,000 people, and somehow I am in front of Christian's fairy godmother. So that was my experience of meeting you. Can you tell us about what you remember of this article, of finding out about Christian and whatever connection you've had with him since?
Yeah, it's so funny. It was so funny, right? What a crazy thing. I don't even remember how we figured that out. I must have said I worked for W or Women's Wear. And then we were like, wait, what? Wait. Yeah. So I was just talking about this story recently too. I think I was in New York now during this period of time. So I had been in Paris and then I went to New York, and I think Natasha Fraser must have been.
Yeah.
She must have said, listen, I was like I was a fashion features editor at Women's Wear Daily and W. And she must have called me and said, listen, my friend, you got to go meet this guy. He's in New York. He's fabulous, blah, blah, blah. And as you're talking, I can picture this where I was sitting talking to him. I feel like, and I may have this wrong. Do you remember? Do you know?
I don't.
Oh, he was staying in some apartment because I feel like we were sitting in this like window. Anyway, I can like picture where I was sitting with him. Of course, I loved him immediately. And
yeah, he's very lovable.
I loved him. And remember, I'm like 25. So this is like 100 million years ago.
Sure. And
like
he's what, 35 anyway? He's not that. And he looks pretty young, I guess.
Yeah, he looked young.
Yeah.
I was a baby.
Yeah.
We were both babies. We were just both young. And I think he had like a meeting with Bloomingdale's or Bergdorf. So he had like meetings. And I loved him. And then I wrote a little thing. But I can't remember if it was in W or Women's Wear. It
was in W.
But I think it was probably in both because they often got published in both. And then somebody, like some big socialites, I can't remember who they were, went and saw him or bought his shoes like right away.
Yeah.
And it took off. And then I moved back to Paris some months later. That's where I was there for 2 more years as the fashion director there. And then we became really good friends. And that's when, I don't know if you were there at the time.
No, because I was in London at that time.
Oh, you were in London. Oh, yeah. And anyway, I think I must have sent him a picture of you and I from TED and texted him. No, I texted him recently. No, maybe I texted him a picture of us on a podcast.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. And I was like,
didn't know that. I texted him after I met you, say, you won't believe it, but I met Heidi. And she was like,
I haven't talked to him in so long. I haven't talked to him in forever, but it was very sweet.
Yeah.
Very sweet.
So I'm glad actually that I remembered for us to get into the story, because as we hinted at the beginning of our conversation, there is that red thread from what you loved doing in your role as a journalist at W and WWD, which was to support young designers and to be in contact with amazingly creative young people. And that goes all the way to the artists that you help. And also, I guess, you give them a platform. You give them an opportunity to be seen beyond the transformative experience, of course, of the residency. It's very poetic, if I may say. Or rather, it's really great to see that you still connect with that thing you love, and you have found a new expression of it. But in the middle, you became an artist yourself.
Yeah.
How does that feel?
It feels like I need to return to my artist now, to be honest.
Yeah.
No, it feels like a really beautiful trajectory. I feel very blessed, and I feel really like I feel very lucky in my life, and to be able to share that with other people. I sometimes I can't believe my life. It's really beautiful. And I really do miss making work right now. So there's a moment, which is now, which is, I need to take care of myself, as we were talking about, really being aware of what is lacking and where is my flame and is it still lighting, a lit. And yeah, I'm trying to veer back into doing my own work.
As I hear you say that, from the giving the platform and supporting young designers and artists to returning to your artist, I feel like maybe it's a balance. The image that came to me was a sort of a pendulum, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that.
Charging.
Or dance.
Yeah, or dance, like charging on the one side and then recharging the other side.
Yeah, I'm so bad at that. I'm trying. It's a practice. It's all a practice.
It was such a fabulous conversation. I just love to talk to you, and I'm in awe of what you've gone through in terms of life journey. And it feels like you've taken me on a film. I feel like I saw some of India and Paris and San Francisco and Garzon. It's really remarkable. I'd love to ask you what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all of the links so that people can find out more about you, who you are, what you do, and Campo. I'd love to be able to have more people discover your work, perhaps.
I don't have plans for Europe right now, but I will for sure be there in 2025 at some point. I don't know if I'll be showing my work or not, or finishing my book on a residency, hopefully somewhere.
Sure.
But I will for sure keep you posted. And I will say that Campo is a nonprofit, that we depend on funds from everywhere. And so that link to donate, if anyone feels moved to support us, is on our website. Like, I can't not mention that.
No, that's very important. Absolutely. Well, have a beautiful rest of your day, because you're a few hours behind me. And I'm looking forward to connecting again soon.
Thanks, Sam. Such a joy to be here with you.
Thanks so much. Take care. So, friends and listeners, thanks again for joining me today. If you'd like to hear more, you can subscribe to the show on the platform of your choice. And if you'd like to connect with me, you can find me at Anvi on Threads, on Instagram, Anvi Mulatala on LinkedIn. If you don't know how to spell it, the link is in the notes. Or on Instagram @_out of the clouds, where I also share daily musings about mindfulness. You can find all of the episodes of the podcast and much more on the website outoftheclouds.com. If you'd like to find out more from me, I invite you also to subscribe to the Meta View, my weekly newsletter where I explore coaching, brand development, conscious communication, and the future of work. That's the Meta View with 2 T's, themetaview.com. So that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening to Out of the Clouds. I hope that you will join me again next time. Until then, be well, be safe, and take care.